Hello and welcome to Best Story Wins. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm here with my co-host, Jason. And today our guest is Joel, product designer at Royal. Thanks for joining us, Joel. How's it going?
Good. How you guys doing?
Yeah, doing great, man.
Good to see you again.
It's good to be here.
Yeah. So Joel, can you give us a quick overview of your company and also what your day-to-day looks like, and maybe share a little bit about what makes it all unique?
Yeah, sure. So I've recently been a product designer at a company called Royal. We're an early stage startup in the crypto space, really merging the opportunities of Web3 and music. We currently have a platform that allows artists to sell their streaming royalties to their fans, which are honestly fairly stable and reliable assets that are currently owned by a real small margin of investment holders. And so we're kind of democratizing that and bringing the ability to invest in music and to invest in artists kind of to everyone. So we do that through a digital smart contract. That was kind of the first version of our product that was there when I joined. Currently, as there's two product designers and a design lead as far as the design team, we're building a lot of other tools for artists, trying to empower them to really connect with fans and monetize their music, and then trying to find smart ways to do that with Web3 rather than some of the more analog and existing ways that the music industry works in.
Oh, that's really cool. And can you share a little bit about how you ended up in this kind of role and what appealed to you about Royal?
Yeah. You also asked about like day in the life. I think one of the main reasons I ended up at this startup, I was previously at Google for a collective about 8 years, was at Chrome, and had made this transition quickly after the pandemic, went remote and had moved to Tennessee from Orange County, California. And so there was a lot of like life and personal reasons, being a dad and whatnot, of trying to be home more and not be flying to San Francisco all the time. But also found myself in a place where I wanted to be working with a smaller team and like with less organizational complexity. Obviously, designing for like a product at scale like Chrome, there's a ton of impact you can make, but also a ton of considerations and complexities that come with the product design. So the more that I've been at Royal, I'm constantly reminded of it's kind of like the Wild West, like early iPhone days before there were a lot of standards in mobile design. And like when blogging was transitioning to social media. So there's a lot of uncertainty and kind of road to be trekked there. And so it's kind of fun to exist in that world and just build a big like building culture of just kind of getting stuff done. Not a lot of like strict lanes. And so obviously that's difficult and given that you wear lots of hats. But I also enjoy that in the sense that I'm not only doing UX and UI flows, I'm creating, video backgrounds and doing marketing stuff and, creating NFT tokens for artists. So there's quite a bit of new things and also learning because I wasn't very Web3 savvy and knew that there was a ton of opportunity and had friends there. So wanted to really work with a smaller team and be in a different space that I hadn't been in before. And kind of stumbled across Royal through some friends and decided to take the leap.
Oh, that's really cool. I think you touched on this already, but obviously going from one of the biggest companies in the world at Google to a smaller startup, earlier stage startup with Royal has got to be a pretty significant transition in terms of just the company size and the type of company that you're working at. What would you say is the biggest difference between working at a company like Google and working at a smaller, early stage and scrappy startup?
Sure. I'd say like in brass tacks as a designer, the biggest difference is I have, more than half less meetings, right? Like less people to synchronize with and horizontal coordination across product teams. And that was really one of the things that was starting to drain on my quality of life of like just being in a big organization. And the more senior you get, the more that you're expected to have impact at that level. And so it just requires you to be in contact with lots of other design leaders and or PMs and engineers to get, initiatives signed off on. And so, the converse of that is because there isn't that complexity, there's a lot more responsibility of like just figure it out, right? And so I almost have no email anymore. Everything is Slack. So my actual communication and engagement with the people I collaborate with is I think more what like Google and bigger companies strive for, is to have like a very tight team that like is always jumping in and checking in and not having this like waterfall handoff of work. I think that's aspirational and really hard to get at a big company unless you're on the right team. And so the actual like workflow of building software with engineers and PMs is much more like it's much closer as far as like the decisions and the problems we're trying to solve. And every quarter that's slowly evolving. Where at Google it was like, all right, we're going to work on this. We might get it out, by next summer. We'll see if we have any regulatory issues, right? So the whole context is super different.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So you started touching on some of these challenges, with the new role, but what's one of the biggest ones you face specifically, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, honestly, it's ignorance. It feels very similar to like I was a print designer before I got into doing UX and UI. And I remember the first time I was gonna show up to that startup and I had downloaded like every PSD and GUI kit that I could find because there was no Sketch or Figma back then, just to like get myself up to date of like what standards were. And I feel very much in the same scenario with Web3 as far as, I've been working in product design for 10 years, but it's always been in a Web 2 context, whether that's like Netflix or Chrome or other startups. And so I find myself now having to like dog food and research other leading products to understand new patterns and new really user points of view. There's a gap between Web 2 and Web 3. And as a product, we're trying to figure out where we sit in that spectrum. And so there's just been a ton of learning. We have now like this like I forget what we call it. We have like Crypto Mondays, and it's kind of like a brown bag where we have some of our experts, engineers in the crypto space, kind of giving really just like lessons and knowledge dropping on new patterns and opportunities of what can be done or what shouldn't be done or other things happening in the market. So really just trying to learn UX of Web3 and trying to understand what's really some of it's really bad UX, right? And so it's like, how do we do this technically significant thing, but also provide patterns that people can understand and adapt to? And I think you see some of this like with MetaMask and Wallet Connect and Coinbase and other, bigger brands and softwares that are in the space that have created patterns I think people are learning. And so every time I start a new project, I find myself going to other examples, trying to understand what the newness is and or what is out there that doesn't make sense to me as a signal of like, hey, we could probably do this better.
Yeah, it is like a notoriously bad user experience. Just like
it's a lot
for like, there's aspects of the Wild West that are exciting, but then you also think about how often people were robbed in the Wild West, and it's like, yeah, that's also why they call it the Wild West.
Yeah, there's winners and losers for sure. And I think it's like when you start talking about wallets and passkeys and all of the complexity of Web3, it feels very similar to like when we used to try to get our parents to understand putting their credit card into a website and or like setting up your email or an RSS feed. Those are very like nascent and confusing, or subscribing to a podcast. Like no one knew how to do that 10 years ago. And now it's very commonplace with things like Spotify. So I do think that some of these things will become much more normalized because there is a ton of opportunity for authenticity and ownership and distribution when it comes to like digital contracts. And so it's really trying to understand what the value is and how to put the right buttons in the right place so that people know what they're even doing. There's a ton of like potential like risk too if your entire investment portfolio is in a wallet that only you control.
Right. And so building a brand in general is challenging. But you're kind of at the intersection of two, one well-established industry with music and then kind of an up and coming movement that, people are still grappling with and defining with Web3 kind of as the placeholder, overarching umbrella over it. But how are you kind of navigating that and balancing that, and what tensions do you experience between kind of the old world and new world there?
Yeah, especially from a brand perspective. The good thing is that we do have a lot of good faith in the music industry, given that Anderson Horowitz is one of our leading investors. And then our founder, Justin Blau, is a successful DJ in his own right and has a lot of good relationships and connections there. So a lot of the early stages of the brand were specifically him going out and meeting people like the Chainsmokers and Nas and other people that have become investors and dropped on our platform. And so Royal as a brand has a fairly respected name within that music community. In that same right, Web3 and music feels very threatening. I think similar to like how streaming and Napster and all of that changed album sales. And so initially we had been working with a lot of bigger artists. And we had a whole artist team that was like hand holding a lot of those executives and lawyers of through what like the opportunities and risks were. And that's really an unscalable thing to do. And so we've moved more into building a product that is more self-serve that allows kind of any artist to use our tools, which changes some of our brand. On the brand design side specifically, we also we had a small layoff kind of when everyone did last year, and we had a bigger brand team that was kind of leading some of that external communication. And now that is kind of all managed by my manager and then myself and the other designer. And so it's definitely a moving target and something we're trying to figure out how, not just like what is the brand, but like who are we really speaking to, whether that's the artist or on the collector side. Obviously, there's like a very passionate minority of native Web3 people that are glad to buy tokens and invest in things on chain that are less understood. But there is an opportunity to explain like why anyone can do that and making that more accessible to people, similar to like micro investing in a lot of other assets that are exist around today.
Right. Yeah, it has your platform has a little bit of that feel to it of some of the micro investing platforms. You can kind of calculate in your head the ROI at least.
That's part of it too. Is like our tagline is invest in music, which is like cool and aspirational, but like, what does that actually mean? And we even find ourselves trying to explain to artists what that means, because there's rights and ownership of like the music you're writing and who owns it. And then there's the opposite of, or not the opposite, but the addition of who's getting paid from the streaming rights. And I think there's a general assumption that like streaming doesn't make money. And I think part of our brand narrative is that it actually does. It only is making money for a certain category of people. And that's usually done in boardrooms, as I understand it, with music industry and kind of those that invest and own those contracts. This is trying to decentralize that a little bit, and I think put some of that ownership and decision making in the artist's hand. The token example is I'm going to do a new release, and instead of doing that through my typical avenues, I can drop that on Royal and give 50% of those earnings to anyone that wants to buy those royalties through our platform. And so they get a token representing some sort of percentage, and then as funds come in, they get paid out on those funds that come in through streaming. So the general ambiguity is, what do I actually own and how much is coming in from my streaming? And that's kind of like a opaque calculation right now. And so one of the biggest benefits of Web3 that we really lean into is making all of that public. Most is on chain, so anyone can see it. So when you sell a token and on our platform today, you can go look at any sale and see who owns what, how much it's been worth, what it started at, where it's at now. And so it's really providing a lot of transparency to like what music's worth and who's paying for it.
Yeah, and what your historical payouts are on the royalties
for sure,
and so forth.
Yeah.
So on your personal experience, and you're talking a bit about some of the company risks, but just on a personal front, what's a time you took a risk that paid off, or one that failed and taught you a big lesson?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think taking the job in general, I think, was a huge risk. Leaving Google and some of that security into a startup, and that kind of never goes away, right? Like the crypto market is very not volatile, but it's always evolving and changing. And so as far as like a parent and a husband, that was a big risk, and I feel like it's paying out. It's worked out so far. Specifically talking about product stuff, one example is that we're building and have launched to a certain set of artists this self-serve tool that allows really our manual process to be productized so that any artist can go through and create. And there's a lot of assumptions of how simple or how technical that should be and how much control. And not only me, but a lot of the product team took really some like hip shots of like, what if it was this way, right? And kind of built it and put it out there. And I think historically probably could have done a lot more research if I was going back to like my Google days and doing a lot of product like qualitative research and validating what we were doing. But time is of the essence, especially with a startup and runway. And so I think, making gut calls on what you think is right based on intuition versus like having to validate it to a suite of leadership, I think is something that I kind of thrive in. I think the having to document and measure everything for in that big company context is something great to learn. I feel like I learned a lot from that environment, but yeah, it's hard to pull out a specific scenario, especially because a lot of the wins are still to be seen, right? Like we've seen growth and whatnot, but we're not screaming our product from the rooftop. We're still kind of building in like a half stealth mode. And so I think, the real risk is like trusting your intuition and really like asking your questions themselves rather than failing and having to iterate later. But we're kind of like learning in real time too. So there's less like behind the curtain, especially because it's Web3, everything is public. So it's a very transparent building process, which feels kind of vulnerable, but is also rewarding when you hear feedback and things actually work. And so that payoff is great to see quickly too.
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective. Yeah, we've talked about this a lot internally, with like various studies and measurements. And our VP of Growth, Asher Rumack, he talks about strategy just as like using information to decide what to do. And we've talked about this in the past where, say if you're split testing a creative concept or something, and if one direction wins, do you have to go with that? Like, is the data deciding for you, or are you leaving room to trust your intuition and maybe override what, some small sample size says you should do? So it's like reserving the human agency there in the decision process, right?
Yeah, even inside of like culturally inside of Google, depending on which team you're on or how new or mature the product is, like I've been at some teams where it was very much like, if it doesn't go green, you don't have positive metrics after the A/B test, it's not shipping, regardless of how much we like it or know people want it, right? Netflix was very much that way when I was there. It was very engineer and metric driven. Chrome was very different in the sense it was open source. And so there was like, we're going to do research to be informed, but we're still going to, our header of research, who I really respected, was like, we're paid too much and have too much experience to like question everything that we think is right. Like there's some intuition of like, we've been doing this, so like, let's make our best guess, make it informed, but also like have some autonomy of decision making. I think now like there's less risk in shipping something at a smaller startup, right? Because less people are using it. I think the decision becomes like, you ship something, whether it's fully public or to like a segment of people, and then you find out what's broken or needs to be fixed. We're having this problem today of like, we had a marketing page that we launched and we want to make improvements to it, but it's like, but we also have a new version of that. Is it worth the while to fix the broken thing or to keep moving forward to the next thing? Like, what's the real risk versus gain in the product decisions? So there is some measurement in that too, of understanding, who's hitting dead ends and what opportunities being lost. But it's a much more like an active decision-making process with the team versus like, I don't make presentation decks anymore. Everything is like, we walk through Figma and real prototypes. And so there's not a lot of back and forth between design, presentation, approval. It's kind of this ever circulating process, somewhat public too with everyone. Yeah.
Well, we can only hope that you guys are successful enough that you get to one day create a bunch of slide decks for stakeholders.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty good in Keynote and in Google Slides, but I had to put those skills on the side a little bit. Yeah,
you'll be able to dust them off when the time comes.
Yeah. It was part of my we had our first round of like performance reviews, which is one of the other like big thorns in my side at Google. Is like, every quarter you have to like measure what you did and why you're talented to get, a promo or whatever. And one of my feedback from the startup was like, your presentations could be a little bit more methodical. It's kind of hard to follow you sometimes. So I've kind of swung the other way of like, polish decks presentations to like just a renegade walkthrough of Figma. And so there is some balance of like making sure you're clear of like what feedback and what the goals are. So I'm always trying to figure out how formal versus how like cowboy to be in my design process.
So you mentioned a bit of the and obviously like any early stage startup, these things are ever evolving. The market around you is
Yeah.
evolving. Is there kind of an overarching or guiding light or philosophy on brand that drives you and your team right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main philosophy and goal is really empowering musicians, and kind of changing and flipping that coin of how those finances work so that they can be more independent. Um, I think the part where it gets complicated for us is we're doing that through new technology and kind of new systems, and so some of those things can be very opaque and confusing. And so part of our goal is to like distill that down so it's understandable for both artists and people who want to collect or support. But then also there's like the general perception of crypto and the risks and what Web3 is doing. And so I wish I had a better like statement of like where we sit on that, but it's very much as our product process is like it's kind of an evolving thing with our brand in the sense that we're doing both. You can buy tokens with a credit card through Stripe on our platform. You don't have to have a crypto wallet. But I think that the more that we're learning from people's reactions and people's preconceived notions about technology, we're leaning more into like, let's build the right thing, and the people that want to leverage this will come. Obviously, that's kind of a who knows like how fast this train is going to move. But I think we're trying to invest in the right things as a product, not so much trying to like hold on to things that we don't think are right just for the sake of scale or for acquisition.
That's super interesting. So Joel, you've had an awesome career in design so far, and I know a lot of people look up to you. We also happen to have a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are part of our newsletter list. Who are kind of earlier in their creative careers, many designers as well. What would you say are some of the most important skills to really hone early in your career, so that you can have more possibilities as you mature and as you get experience? And these can be skills that are specific to design, or even just some of the soft skills like communication and collaboration and so forth.
Yeah, I do think that like, I mean, if I had to be generic, I would say like curiosity and flexibility. I think willing to take risks, whether that's like changing jobs when you have an opportunity to take a new challenging thing, or learning the new software and or like ditching your old workflow. I think those things can be scary. And I think a lot of craft roles, people think like, well, as long as I put in my 1,000 hours or whatever it is and figure out the right tools to become an expert in that, then I'll be okay. And the reality is you might be for like 5 years, but like shit's going to change. And then like you're going to have to learn a new tool. AI is a good example of this where it's like very renegade and new. Everyone's saying you should be doing it because you're falling behind, but it's still kind of ambiguous to how I'm supposed to implement it. But I think having the willingness to like go after that, watch YouTubes and subscribe to podcasts, and that general curiosity to learn, I think really pays back in dividends. I wouldn't have had, I think, some of the successes in my career if I wasn't willing enough to like try some new things or do things that I didn't quite understand. Whether that was like when I joined Netflix, my main colleague was using Keynote for efficiency, and I was like, "This is crazy." You need to have the the visual acuity and like pixel perfection of Photoshop or Sketch, and he really taught me more about like communication and the ways of like communicating what the design's trying to do, not like presenting polished design itself. It's really a communication tool because it has to be built anyways. And so even like that perception of like, what is my role? Often and for some people it is, I'm an IC now. My role is to like make mocks and flows and prototypes. But more importantly, if I'm just doing those things and no one understands why we're doing it, I think that's where like the soft skill comes in, where it's like, it's easy to think about separate people on a team and say, well, you do this and I do that and you do this and then we'll ship something. And in reality, that just creates like a combative, like weird disconnect of a team. And I think one of the things that I've really been enjoying at a small startup is like everyone kind of owns the responsibility. And so if something's not working, like we have to change it. Like we recently started using 37 signals shape process, which like scopes all your efforts down to like a time box 6-week cycle. And so you like scope and prioritize based on what you have and what you want to do, strictly based on that limited amount of time. And we found that just because a lot of the net new things we were building were kind of bloating in scope, and it was kind of killing us. And as we were trying to like be efficient and build fast. So even us as a whole team, we're like, we're going to try this new thing out every Friday. We're going to talk about what's working and not working. And a lot of it hasn't worked and some of it has. And so that active conversation and being okay with not being okay, I think taking a lot of the ego and like right or wrongness out of things helps. And just being open to being wrong, to learn, I think really can be applied to any kind of role. And I think it's really hard for people that are creative, because a lot of what you're making and doing, that is tied to your identity, and you do care about this stuff. And so I'm still trying to figure out how much to care about my work and how much naturally do care a lot and will probably over design or go too far than what is needed. And I think that's good, like to like over, like not under promise, but overperform to like what's being asked, but also that's like not very efficient. And so like I'm trying to like curtail myself and be like, all right, this is what we're really trying to do. You know that these other things can go this way, but like be focused, figure this thing out, fail, get it right, and then move on to the next thing. So yeah, there's a weird like, I don't know if there's a way to like teach that. I think that's more just by experience of like, of really going through and building stuff that wins and building stuff that doesn't. And I think you kind of learn to grow personally, whether that's through your communication skills or how you address your craft or whatnot.
That's such awesome perspective. It reminds me of a coach I was talking to a few years ago, and I was really just like worried about something failing. And he's like, so let's fast forward 3 years. If this fails, what will you do? And I just was like, oh, I'll probably, go back to doing this for a little while or whatever. And it was like the process of realizing like, okay, if this aspect of what I'm doing fails, like I'm not going to die and going to be okay, was like, oh, okay. Like it's easy to say, everyone throws out things like, move fast and break things and fail early, and it's like, it is a lot harder to like actually get into a place where you like can accept your own failings or mistakes and be able to like, even talking a lot about communication, I think such a key part of that is to be able to like communicate to, partners, colleagues, stakeholders, like this is what we learned from that. And this is what we're going to do next, based on what didn't work, rather than just, crawling under a rock.
I was even thinking about it on the way when I was driving over here. I used to vlog a lot back in the day when I was at Google, and I've been having this like urge to do it again, just to share, just to process thoughts and things that are evolving as a designer and a creative. And I think one of the biggest changes from like the headspace I was in California working for Google versus where I'm at in Tennessee at a startup is that, I started this career like on the coattails of like the Gary Vaynerchuk hustle, like fake it till you make it kind of mentality. And that proved out well. Like, I think there's a time and place for those things. But I find myself like trying to do the opposite of that and being like, I don't know, like, help me. Right. Like, don't fake it. Like, just be vulnerable and honest. And if you're faking it, then no one that knows the answer can help you. And so I think some of that, like, and I think it's overly pretentious to think that we can control shit. Like, to think that like we know that like staying at this job or doing this thing is going to net positive in the future, I think is a fallacy. I think we only control so much. And so like just trying to do the right thing right now, and kind of letting things unfold, is a better time to spend like spend time in your mind. Like, I think creatives are kind of plagued in their head of like evaluating this versus that, especially if you're like a professional, like critiquing, and it's your job to like point out what's wrong. I got to a point where like that was physically crippling, to where like I wanted to analyze and try to understand everything. And I do think in the end, that's like a sense of like there's some pretentiousness or like pride in that, thinking you have control. And most of us don't over the market, over our companies. Anyone that's been laid off quickly knows that like, oh, this job and this thing wasn't as important as I thought it was, or these people don't care about me as much as they did. And so I think like holding those things and trying to look at them honestly is good for like the mind of the creative, or like will provide some of that flexibility to like fail or try something new.
What are you most excited about working on right now? Is there any sneak previews you can share verbally?
There are things that I probably can't share. I think I mentioned earlier that we're leaning more into being more Web3 native and following some of those patterns. So I've really been enjoying understanding. I used to always kind of write off Web3 and be like, no one's going to get this. It's way too complicated. But I think there's good examples of products that are doing this in a delightful or easier way to understand. And so trying to lean into some of those patterns and really amplify what is working about Web3. I think that's one of the big things that is misunderstood is like Web3 in general, decentralization gets looped in with meme coins and, all of the stuff happening in Congress and the news with altcoins and that fluctuation. And those are distributed and decentralized as well, kind of. But like smart contracts and true ownership through digital contracts is very different. And so trying to amplify not only to like our users, but to like our investors and to other people that might be doing business with us of why this makes sense for certain artists. It's been fun to like learn and to be opinionated in design. I think it's something else is that like when you design at a big company, everything is kind of for everyone. And so like any specific type of interaction or product that you want to build usually is too niche for everyone. And so, and building for a specific use case and for a specific market allows you to, I think, take more chances and try things that you wouldn't normally be able to do if you were designing it like Spotify or something.
I appreciate that you're thinking about it as more than, when price go up.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal, right? Because this isn't, I think a lot of people do think it's funny money, and it does change kind of like funny money if you watch like altcoins and some of that hype. And I do think some of the general get in early and go to the moon and get out, it's all, based on like this fake kind of lottery win. And people have become millionaires on crypto. But I think when you start talking like one of the big problems that we have is, and this is one of the things we just shipped is you can come through, put in, a Spotify URL, find any song on Spotify, and we'll estimate what we think that's going to earn over the next 10 years based on your genre, streaming count, and like the depreciation over time with genre. And so even that, like building simple tools that allow people to get some of the numbers that only other agents might have. And then, I was saying like one of the things like with authenticity, if you're Taylor Swift and you want to come drop a song on our platform, we have to know that you're actually Taylor Swift because we're not involved, right? It's a self-serve process. So if you're a bad actor and you list something that you don't actually own and a bunch of people buy it, then we're stuck being the bad guy. And so one of the big things we're trying to solve is how do you actually know an artist is that artist, and how do you validate their music, and then how can you move that on chain so it's not a bunch of like paper PDFs that people signed, but it's something that anyone can see and is owned by the artist. It's something that I want for my medical records, right? Like it's ridiculous that I have to call a doctor from California to get records sent over when those should just be in my crypto wallet. I should have access to those things and that ID. I am that person. And this gets into a weird thing of like, having personal ID cards on chain and like we're all, being tracked by technology. But I do think like autonomy and ownership of digital things, whether that's like the content in your email. We see this with like advertising and people being like, digital privacy and those things. I think crypto is leaning into that more of like really, Threads is a great example where it's like, it's partially on chain, right? If you have people follow you on Threads, you can take that community somewhere else. And Instagram doesn't own those connections of you and follower. And I think those are the things that are really exciting of building value, not only on our platform, but in the broader decentralized Web3 space that can benefit across different tools rather than this competitive create a user account and password and never leave our platform. And I think it's a big switch from like typical social media to opportunity of tools in Web3 is that it kind of takes some of the control, or like the carrot that is being held in front of you. It kind of removes that and gives the user a better experience. I think a great example that's tried and true and everyone experiences is like iMessage across iOS and Android, right? Like that frustration is only for retention in iOS, right? Like the only reason that exists is because Apple wants it that way, because like you shun your Android friends because they can't be in your group chat. In a decentralized world, when you just had a phone number and numbers, it didn't matter who you had your phone with, right? And so I think we've kind of been pushed into this world of walled gardens that is very useful, right? And I'm on a Mac with Mac headphones. There's a lot of benefit to being inside of a designed ecosystem, but when it comes to like ownership of my stuff or my records or what I own, that being owned by X company, I think is kind of a lie that was sold to us for convenience. And so I think Web3, even though is seen as like this scary space where you're going to lose money on a picture of an ape, the flip side of that is there's actually a lot of base technology that puts a lot of ownership and independence into the specific user and takes that away from whatever company is trying to retain your account and username.
So Joel, the name of our podcast is Best Story Wins, and that is rooted in our belief that your brand story is the best way for a company to differentiate and then compete and ultimately win the hearts and minds of customers, win their market. In your opinion, what are the key ways to telling a great brand story?
It's a great question. And especially it's even harder for me as like a UX designer, because usually that's like the marketing team's job is to like communicate that. But I'm very much more in that driving seat now, where we are thinking about brand story and how we're communicating. I think the best way is to do it authentically, and not like I think historically a lot of like rich assets and slick animations could get you a lot of trust as a brand. And I think more now today it's like the day-to-day interaction and how the product actually performs. And so I think like the best way to tell a good brand story is to be a good brand and to like actually do what you say you're going to do. Like if we were saying we want to empower artists, but we're taking some 50% cut and making bank, like we're being disingenuous there. And so I think one of the benefits of us not having a marketing, like an explicit like brand marketing team, is that when we launch a new product, I had to even ask my bosses, like, well, when do we change the website? And he's like, that's on your plate. Like, we have to recommunicate that value externally. And so it goes back to the ownership of like doing the thing wholesale, not just like being at someone else's role. Someone else should do that. That you eventually see that in the brand across organization, where like the homepage looks great, but this thing looks like crap because someone else didn't do it, or that's not being invested in. And I think we talked about Apple. Apple's a great example where they have a very trusted brand because their shit always works and it's always beautiful. And they don't let those gaps show often. And so I think really being your brand inside of the product, especially from a software point of view, obviously I don't like sell jeans or accessories or anything. In the software, like making sure the software is actually doing what you say it's going to do and deliver on the promise. I find it fascinating that most like with TikTok and like a lot of Gen Z marketing, like the polished thing is almost distrusted now. If you're like too glassy and it comes off as disingenuous because like no one's that perfect. So this like more ad hoc, similar to like early vlogs, I think, where it was just kind of like, this is just me. I think that goes a long way with trust. And I think it's probably the hardest thing about creating a brand story is getting people's trust. And it's probably the hardest part of our brand story is saying we're doing Web3 and having people's trust, right? Because there is so much skepticism. Similar to like when I was at Google and Chrome, we would say, hey, you can do this. It's going to be great for you. Like, yeah, but you're going to like look over my stuff and like monetize it and sell ads against it. You're like, no, like we're actually doing this because it's better for you. And like getting people to not assume that you're doing something wrong. I think you can create as many campaigns and do as much messaging as you want, but like actually delivering on that promise and being transparent about it, I think it's not the most practical way necessarily, but I do think it was like the highest return as far as creating loyal customers or users.
Yeah, I totally agree. So In the absence of a dedicated brand marketing team, who are the people that are working together to define and then kind of tell that brand story?
Yeah, so we have a fairly small and nimble team. I had mentioned for design, there's myself and this other designer, awesome, who's in LA. Her name's Aya. And then we have a manager. We also have a content person who does a lot more than just copyright and content, but she collaborates a lot on a lot of our messaging, which is really important for us to like figure out how to talk about these things and in scenarios where it is very technical or financial, being accurate and transparent. Like I had a meeting before this about talking about streaming rights versus like royalties versus ownership over music, and a lot of artists don't even understand that. So we have a copy person that works on a lot of those details, and then she has an operations manager. But a lot of our external pages we're building and iterating on in Framer, and so our engineering tries to stay away from some of that weight, given we're trying to have them build products. But it is a fairly small team, and then we have probably 20 some engineers that we can always grab if we need to build some front end UIs. But it's a handful of people.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. And then how are you all getting a sense or measuring whether that story that you're telling is resonating with the people you're trying to reach?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, part of it is like, who are we trying to ask if it's working? We do have a Discord chat with all of our whales, as we call them, all the people that are our main collectors on our platform. And so we have a very transparent stream of feedback from those folks. Even since we've been building some more of these new tools, they're like, hey, the website hasn't changed. The marketplace is getting kind of stale. Like, what's going on? And so they keep us honest as far as making the experiences continually engaging and offering new opportunities for investment there, while also trying to build really the incoming side of our platform of getting more artists on to drop more music. And so we have that transparent conversation there. Given that we're a Web3 company and everything is in Slack, we have a lot of channels around like socially what's being discussed and what's coming out, whether those are arguments and things that are happening in the news. So we're pretty current on happenings both in crypto and in music, and trying to educate. The hard thing is that we have like a lot of, just like any product business, but like we have a lot of tech savvy folks from big tech companies, and then a lot of music centric folks from like New York or LA, and some people in between that have been like YouTube Music or Spotify. But there our product really requires a lot of that knowledge share of like, well, this is how we should build things technically, and then like, well, this is actually how people think about distributing their music. And so trying to get both the like evolving crypto space and then also the evolving music space, which is changing just as fast, as far as when you look at like touring or music sales or streaming or how you release an album. I think we're always kind of asking questions. I wish we had more time to do more like actual user research, but practically that looked like that's me grabbing a coffee with like one of my producer friends here in Nashville and being like, how do you guys make money? How often do you release songs? Which platforms do you use? What do you want to do that you can't do? So there's like user things that we need to learn from the artist side, collector things, making sure that they're still like incentivized to buy and invest. And then the broader, like, how do you get people to like trust your business when music and crypto is changing and or evolving against existing business models?
A lot of conversations.
Yeah, I think it's part of like going back to like the like being okay to be wrong and like the humility for like, no, we know what people need, we're just going to go in a dark room and build it. I think that's a real bad way to build product, because you're always going to be wrong in some vector. And so as long as you can build quickly and get feedback without really making people vulnerable or having real issues. Obviously, like Facebook has pumped the brakes on the move fast and break stuff, because you can't when you're that big. And so it really depends on like what we're talking about specifically versus like what you're investing versus releasing music, because we don't want people just flippantly buying stuff that they're going to be disappointed on if it doesn't perform as they expect. So that's where I think some of that transparency comes into.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Now it's if you break anything, you die.
yeah. That's
move slow.
They casually switched out the posters from what I heard.
Yeah, it's move slow and break nothing, right?
Yeah. And if you do, don't talk about it unless you're sitting in Congress.
So you've talked a lot about kind of this evolution of Web3 and music in parallel, and I'm curious how you think about your team collectively or you individually, these fluctuations. How do they impact? Like, at what cadence do they impact your actual strategy and overall direction?
Sure. I think the
Not
one
cadence,
benefit,
but like what's significant
yeah,
enough for you to go, oh, we need to rethink our entire strategy here.
yeah. I think we lean a lot on our founder Justin for this, given that he is an artist in the crypto space. So like a lot of the things that he wants to do or pioneer, he's personally trying to do with his own, music DJ brand. And so he's in a lot of active conversations with some of the leading people in the crypto space. I think we become kind of a mirror to him to being like, are you sure? Or like, how are we going to get people to actually understand that? Or really trying to like push back and figure out how that makes sense in the current product market. I think for an early stage startup, this would most affect you with like funding, where like investors like, I'm not going to invest in your crazy idea. It's crypto. It's crazy and misunderstood. We have, Anderson Horowitz as our main investor, and I think they're trying to use us as a good example with some of the conversations that are happening in the investment and regulatory space of like the benefits of Web3. But I think the hardest like pivot or like adjustments we have to make right now is within the artists. And so I think with larger artists, they have a lot more to lose. And so moving from their existing model with a label and an original distributor, it's very scary to say, oh, I'm going to screw all these people that I've been working with, try this new thing, and I'm going to take all the money. And I think they would gladly do it if they knew it was for sure. But a lot of what we've learned is a lot of that is like, let's wait and see. It's not like no, it's just like it's early. And so I think I think the evolution that I've seen the short time I've been here is that it's much easier to sell the value to people that are looking for it, people that are independent, that don't already have a relationship with a label or with a big agent or whatnot, and trying to show them that like, hey, you don't need all of that. You can do it through this. It's still on their back to build, right? They're not getting a label to promote and getting some of that scale. But I think part of it is like trying to distill a conversation of not just like, oh, we're just a Web3 company. It's like, no, we're a company that sells like digital royalties through the chain, right? And I think like even in the year that I've been this company, my wife still doesn't know what I do, and I've tried to explain it to people. And so I think there's a general hump there of like overall technical literacy. But when it comes to like artists and collectors, I think we focused more on the people that do understand it, that are less afraid, or people that are like adjacent in the space that could easily convert or finding ways to incentivize them, so that they'll go through that like manual process of learning. Because I think on their side too, there has to be some like willingness and transparency to learn and fail a little bit if it's a less than proven format for releasing and gaining streaming rights. And so yeah, we have some of that inherited complexity where like even like Spotify has got a lot of flack for how they pay people, and that narrative is really hard to like walk back from and explain our model compared to what people understand today is streaming.
Right. Yeah, you're touching on some important things there for any early stage startup is with reasonably limited resources. You guys are well backed and so forth, but that market focus that you're touching on there is so essential. So it sounds like you guys have matured a bit on that, right? Like you're starting to at least define some of these things around who you're not for, right? Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, even like as a designer, right? Like half a year ago, like the directive and what we were trying to communicate was somewhat different from what we're doing today, right? So like even our leadership to say like, hey, maybe this isn't the best thing. Let's explore this for a quarter and see if this is going to perform different or be perceived different. And so I think it's seen as like a good leader and honorary to be like, no, this is what we're doing. We're going to blaze the trail and we're not changing. We're going to do this. And I think there's a level of humility as a startup founder that you have to have, is like, even if we have a lot of good ideas and know what we're doing, things are ever evolving, especially in crypto. So I think it's less about like, do we have enough money to build what we want? It's more or less like, we have the funds, we have to get it right now because it's changing. And so you don't necessarily have all the time to figure it out, because it's going to be a different world in 2 years. Crypto will look very different. The market will look very different. Um, Politics and all the regulatory stuff will look very different. So I think a lot of what I've appreciated from the team at Royal and what I've been trying to lean into is like really that, not reactiveness, but adapting and learning, and letting that inform you versus preconceived notions and like truths, which you can probably rely on in a more like stabilized or traditional environment as a product or a brand. But the more evolving or even like the agency model, you think of like Column 5 versus like some of these new like fully distributed like rogue agencies, right? It's very different. It's a very different value too. Um, and so I imagine that like getting customers or hiring people, like those are very different scenarios. They're all providing design services. But when it comes to like, what is your vision and how long tail is that vision versus how evolving is that vision? I think it's a very unique question for each kind of brand and each product. But at least in Royal's case, we're adapting a lot, which for me is kind of fun. It can be frustrating. Be like, well, we said we were doing this, and now we're doing something different. But I think I'm getting more comfortable in that ethos of like we're trying to do the right thing, but do it efficiently, not failing for too long, right? Because there's too much opportunity and time to be lost by holding on to your preconceived notions.
Yeah, and you mentioned the pace of the world changing, and I'm curious how you are looking at, I guess, the simultaneous threat and opportunity of AI in your space.
Yeah. So the AI has been a conversation inside of our company on two vectors. One is like AI music is a huge disruptor and opportunity for people. You have what's her name? She's like dating Elon Musk.
Grimes.
Grimes. So like she leaned in, right, and like put her stems out, and anyone can write any AI music using Grimes likeness and a voice. And like there's a Web3 contract for anything created on that. She gets a cut. So like that's one of those like distributed, transparent Web3 things. It's a huge opportunity. In that same vein, like there's also people that made that like Drake and Weeknd song or whatever without their permission, and it went viral, and all the DSPs took it down. So like spoofing versus like accelerating and collaboration, I think are like the good and bad side of that coin. And so I think it's really interesting for us to understand how that's going to become like a new revenue model and or a way that like artists monetize their music outside of doing their own releases, but different ways to collaborate, and not just like collaborate and like do a beat, but how do you like productize and create the on-chain connections between those things so that everyone gets paid. And it's not just like a buddy deal. So that's on the music side. We've talked about stuff, and it's really interesting to see that music industry evolve that way. On the product side, we also have like, we do tokens when you buy percentage, and all that token does is represent your ownership in that royalty. But there is what we kind of started, even before I was at the company, during kind of the NFT boom, and we kind of rode that wave of like individually unique non-fungible tokens. And so that ability to create cool art that is unique is very hard for artists to do. They usually have like a graphic designer they can't afford to pay that makes maybe an album artwork. Maybe they have a photo shoot of stuff they want to use. But we've been looking at a way to use AI, not to like just create random stuff, but as a way to throw inputs at it to generate probable unique art and or animations or whatnot, to make some of that like token ownership experience more interesting. So I think like that way of like not just fully relying on AI, but using it as a proxy to give it input and seeing what that output is for assets is interesting. We've also used it for a lot of simple stuff like copy. We've taken like bios that exist and say like, evolve this, make it shorter, make it more hip, da 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 da. And that's for like exploration, trying to figure out the best way to like represent artists and or to write marketing copy is obviously something that lots of folks are doing. So looking into that, but I'm really interested to see like more of the end product implementations. I just had to like mock a chat UI, and it has like, it was like 5 or 6 different threads, and I was like just mocking it up. I didn't care what the copy was, and normally would have gone to Lorem Ipsum, but instead went to ChatGPT or Bard and was like, hey, these are the 2 people. They're doing a live studio session. Give me a conversation at the beginning of the Zoom call. it gave me this like perfect, like realistic output, just as lorem ipsum. It wasn't like for the product, it was just for my presentation needs. But that alone like made the mock like realistic, and it was cheaper than even like getting lorem ipsum and like copying and pasting and making it fit the character sizes. So I think that's one of those like, flexibility, learning new things, of like figuring out what works for you and what is inefficient or annoying in your process, and trying to leverage that AI. But I know as creatives, it's become that's like hugely contentious as far as like people, getting paid for their likeness. If people are using, if I create this create me a visual graph of the style of column 5, that's currently an issue. I think the solution for that is like having some sort of on-chain representation of your artwork. So when it is referenced by an AI, you get paid a royalty, right? Like there's no way of doing that through like current Creative Commons and like copyright stuff. So I think those are the things that start to become interesting, where it's like, yeah, this is a problem today, but this actually is solvable through technology. I think it's just a matter of time for people to fully understand, and or for markets to die out for those things to kind of become the new standard.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a super interesting, super big rabbit hole, and
it's wild, dude. There's like aliens and AI, and like we're building like it's a weird time. Like even talking about longevity, I don't think much about 10 years from now. Like if I went to an interview, I was like, "What do you see yourself in 10 years?" Like I can't even consider it. Like I'm just worried about this year. You know what I mean? Like I think things change so fast, not only because of technology, just because of like the speed of everything and social and everything socially and politically. Like it's yeah, I find myself in a very much more visceral, like taking things as they come versus assuming that like I'm going to define this path and go down it, both from like a personal and like a designer, like product point of view.
It does.
Yeah,
it does
I think that's
seem
a good place to be.
It does seem like adding aliens into the mix, like especially next year in an election year on top of AI, and that would be like a good way. Like just when you think things can't get more like complex or
weird,
fast changing, like just
who cares about your royalties when we got aliens and gravitational technology, whatever else is out there.
Yeah, just like a bona fide alien visitation where they just start kind of like dropping in some of their technology into the mix, and everyone's trying to clamor.
Maybe they have the answers. Maybe it'll get a lot easier. Maybe they'll just figure it out for us.
Oh man, I wish we would have started the episode.
We should have started on aliens.
Yeah, I know, right?
Let's start over.
Yeah, I just changed my TikTok profile to say I'm here for chicken talk and aliens, because it's like I just watch people take care of their chickens and conspiracy theories.
Dude, it's so good. We're gonna have to book a follow-up episode and go down this rabbit hole. It's so funny. I was just grabbing a coffee yesterday. And I was my buddy's got a barbecue restaurant, or a pop-up actually in Franklin where you live. It's called Crop Circle Barbecue. And I was wearing this hat into this coffee shop, and the guy behind the counter, he owns the shop. He was just like, "Crop circles, huh?" And then he launched in like a 15-minute like monologue about aliens and the pyramids. And I was just like, I had the time, and I was like, I'm here for it, man. Like just,
it's fun as a respite from thinking about real. I mean, maybe it is real stuff, but like, I just went and saw Blink-182 when they're here in Nashville. They were playing with Turnstile, and it's so fun to see Tom DeLonge. They had like a whole song. He introduced it. It was like, I was right about aliens, and they played this whole song, and the whole backdrop was like flying UFOs. And it's just a weird world where it's like, Blink-182 is playing, a stadium in Nashville. He talked about alien things that got released, and crypto actually can be useful. Like all of these things seem like ridiculous, but also relevantly true. And so, I don't have a lot of faith in anything anymore. I'm just kind of taking it as it comes, because everything I used to understand and trust has let me down, and things that I thought were ridiculous are proven to be true. So, I feel younger every day.
What is the law? The like most bizarre or whatever humorous outcome is the most probable outcome?
Right.
That's what's happening. Yeah.
You're either crazy or correct.
Oh man, so good. Well, Joel, I know we have to wrap up. We're a little over time. Any final tips or thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
Oh man, eat your humble pie, and just be kind. I think everyone's a little crazy and everyone's suffering a little bit. I think the more empathy and the more for both others and yourself, I think the especially as creators, we're going to be better. I see a lot of people suffering silently at their desk. And I think a lot of that is just in our head. It's one of the things that moving to Tennessee's helped me, is like really get me out of my head and just focus on what really matters to me. And I think it's kind of aspirational and like soft, but I do think that like it in turn makes your brand or your work better, the healthier and kinder you or your team or your company is. And I think that only comes through like being better people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have anything, no URLs to share. I'm online and stuff. I'm pretty quiet these days, but yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, if people do want to learn more about you, and if they do want to follow you online,
Sure.
What are the best places to find you?
Yeah, everything is on my site. It's bkl.mn. It's my last name, no vowels. And my handle everywhere is bklmn. I'm pretty public online, so if you search my name, you can find me. Have some old YouTube stuff that I might be firing back up here soon, just to connect, because I'm kind of in the hills of Tennessee now. But yeah, I'm on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, all the things.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Joel, it was so good hanging out. Always good to see you. And
So good.
Yeah, I look forward to chatting again soon.
Column 5's Best Story Wins is for marketing and branding professionals looking to unlock their growth potential. Each episode features a conversation with industry leaders about how they win the hearts and minds of their customers and build world-class brands. You'll learn about their success stories and their failures, as well as ideas for how to take your own marketing efforts to the next level. Welcome to Best Story Wins.